surely we can make some headway and sift out good theories from bad ones. This is the hard stuff, because these are the philosophers trying to deal with the issues.
Welcome to Thinking About God with Dr.Barry Whitney. In this series, Dr. Whitney explores the formidable challenge of reconciling belief in God with the evil, injustice, and suffering in the world. What can be learned from theological study on this problem? What can be learned from faith? Separating good and bad answers by sound, theological, and biblical study and reflection has been central in Dr. Whitney's attempt to justify belief in God despite the world's evil and suffering.
This, just to remind you, it's a new version of what I had on last week. Right at the end of class, we started talking about wrath. I understand from using this book for years, Encountering Evil, that it can be intimidating, so I'm trying to give you the main points here so that it isn't intimidating. Roth's conviction is that there is no acceptable, rational understanding of suffering. He doesn't want anyone to tell him that we can understand this. And he's angry at God because God hasn't intervened to prevent the Holocaust and evils like that, but especially the Holocaust, which is the symbol of evil in this age. He's telling you, number one, a theodicy, and you now know a theodicy means a rational explanation, a defense of God, of why God allows suffering. It's a test, it's a trial, it's spiritual growth. We have all of these answers. Roth thinks they're all wrong. It's an insult to the sufferer. We have to be aware of this. I think a lot of people are with Roth. I hope not, but there is something blasphemous theologically about what we're trying to do here. We're trying to understand God. And that in itself, that's what theology does. But a lot of people who aren't theologians think that that's ridiculous. How could anybody understand anything about God? The simple answer is, I don't expect as a theologian to understand all there is to know about God, but surely some things are available to understand. I don't expect to solve the problem of evil rationally, but surely we can make some headway and sift out good theories from bad ones. But Roth is saying, I don't like any of your theories. There is no way you can ever explain why a powerful and good God would have allowed the Holocaust. That's his simple line. Roth basically says free will defense is not cost effective. There's too much evil. Remember, I gave you the example of Sophie's Choice that he uses, that novel that became this great movie. Sophie had a choice between which of her sons was going to be killed by the Nazis. Roth says there's an example of free will isn't really working. God shouldn't have given us so little free will. Sophie had so little choice. Curing cancer is a good example. We have so little of free will ability to cure cancer and all of these. So he's saying, on the one hand, Hitler has too much free will. On the other hand, you and I have too little free will. You can think about this as profound, but it's pretty silly. But he's saying, if there is a God, all-powerful, all-loving, all-knowing, knowing what's going to happen if he creates creatures with free will, Roth is saying, seems to me that God either gave us too much or too little. It just doesn't seem to be working. It's not worth it. Now, I'm not sure too many people would want to stand up and say, my free will is not worth it. Roth's very radical, very emotional, as I was saying last time. Because most of us regard our free will as it's our greatest gift. If we weren't free, we're a microphone, for Pete's sake. We're a table, a chair. We're a dog and a cat who have minimal free will at best. We're free. Despite the fact that there's people out there trying to deny we're free, that's our greatest asset. Roth is standing up saying, my free will's not worth it. God should have made us somehow better. Tell me how. He doesn't give you the option. It's strange to say free will is not cost effective. There's too much evil. History is a slaughter bench. He's quoting Hegel, the great philosopher. You have to read this thing to really appreciate some of the humor amid the emotion. That is just one thing after another. One suffering, one misery after. It just doesn't seem to be working. So that's his gripe. I think he's overreacting, but God knows he represents a lot of people who do overreact because this is not the intellectual problem we'd like it to be. It's an emotional, knee-jerk, horrible reaction to, I've got cancer, I'm suffering, I'm dying, my friends die. This is emotional stuff. God could intervene, he's saying. He believes God's all-powerful. Remember, he also believes that, this is a strange belief, that Roth and Hick and Davis, the three people in the book we're going to read, Encountering Evil, they all have this modern Protestant understanding that God doesn't predetermine everything, allowing free will at the same time. The traditional solution is that God predetermines everything, and yet there's still freedom. The new approach, God could determine everything, but God self-limits the power God has. What it's saying is that God's not in charge. God has not caused this evil or that evil, but God has the power to eradicate it. And Roth's saying that God should do more. God should interact more. God should get rid of the horrendous evils. We could go on for an hour with that one question. We've got two answers right now, but this is not the time and place. Later will be. The third one, right? Roth is saying, here is the great solution, Christians, Jews, and Muslims. This is part of the solution. It's not one thing, it's lots of things. Redemption. Somehow there's going to be an afterlife. This suffering, and this is just it's all meaningless compared to what's in store. As bad as it is, one of the things that Christians and Muslims and some Jews believe in, the afterlife, redemption, where the good are redeemed, the suffering and the good and the bad are punished or whatever. And there's lots of different versions of punishment. Isolation from God, torment, all kinds of... That's at least part of the solution. But Roth's saying, don't tell me that these people who were slaughtered, 12,000 a day in the Holocaust, are going to be redeemed, justified. It's all going to make sense. Somehow it's going to be worth it. It's like when Dostoevsky says, when the mother embraces the murderer of her son, she's going to say, it's okay. It's all understandable now. It just doesn't seem rational to Roth. Now what he's rejecting is a pinnacle, a huge doctrine in Christians, Jews, and some Jews and Muslims. And Davis's response to that one is to say, of course God can redeem this. Just read your scriptures. That's what it's all about. This is not all there is. There is no justice in this life. We know that. The innocent do suffer. If you're good, you don't always get reward. You don't always get good in return. Justice doesn't exist here, but the Christian, Muslim belief and some Jews believe that redemption is possible because, as Davis says, if God is all-powerful, why can't God as all-powerful redeem evil? That's the belief, that God can do that. That's what it's all about. Evil will be redeemed. Redeemed is a strange word, redemption. It's just made right, justified, somehow explained. It doesn't mean reward and punishment as much as understood. It means all those things, but a lot more. Number 4, rightly, remember, he rejects, don't tell me that all of this suffering is somehow God's punishment. I'm going to show you, though, if you haven't read my chapter 9 yet and I got an evil link, you'd be surprised. I think I counted of the 15 or 16 Jewish theologians who responded to the Holocaust, about 6 of them were saying it was divine punishment. That's a very common theory. That is the dominant Old Testament theory, the Hebrew Bible theory. But Roth, rightly, I think, to say that the Holocaust was God's punishment, that's hard to believe. That's hard to believe, a God that would let 12,000 people be slaughtered a day in just horrible tortures. To think that God is good, it's hard to believe. So Roth, I think, is right about number 4, that you don't want to think that's punishment. Even though some Jewish theologians say it is punishment. It's punishment for assimilation. It's punishment for the Zionists. It's punishment for disobeying God's law. They have all these reasons, and that's pretty harsh. You don't want to go to a hospital room or the father of a suffering child and say you're being punished. It's a horrible thing. Like I was saying last time, we don't want to generalize any of these legitimate... In some cases it may be God's punishment, but you can't say in all cases it's God's punishment. I would hope in very little. I think the punishment comes later and the reward in another lifetime, but in this lifetime I don't think there's that kind of justice. If you were punished every time you did something evil, chances are you'd become good pretty quickly. You'd realize that the buzzer goes every time you think or do an evil thing, and this is not how God operates. That wouldn't make any sense. God wants us to freely choose to love and obey, not to force us through instant punishment and instant reward, even afterlife punishment and afterlife reward. So we have to deal with that problem before we're through. Number 5, this is the dominant theory. If you think the punishment one is bad, that suffering is God's punishment, Roth rejects that rightly, and I think he rightly rejects it's all God's will. Now there are Jewish theologians that I've listed in that chapter 9 that do say this was God's will. to think that this is God's will or God's plan. And they say it was to strengthen us. It was to solidify us. They have all these reasons why it's part of God's plan. Some of them said it was a good thing in a way because it made the world aware of suffering. And it was a good thing because God tested our free will and we failed in Western culture. They have all these reasons how it could be part of God's plan, but that's a very difficult doctrine to defend. If everything is all planned by God, you and I are in trouble because we have really no choice anymore. That's where the issue lies. Mind you, this issue of whether there can be free will at the same time that God has predetermined or planned everything, that is one of the biggest theological problems. There is no simple solution to that one. The Catholics have 2 solutions. The Protestants have 2 or 3 solutions. It's a very difficult question. That's one of the mysteries of life. How can God be in charge? How much is God in charge? What can God do vis-a-vis our free will? Does God never intervene? Does God sometimes intervene? It seems to a lot of people God doesn't. But if God never intervenes, then there's no answering of prayer. There's no giving us grace at each moment so that we can carry on with courage and perseverance and do the right thing. Again, that's an issue we have to face. All of these things are part of the problem of evil, and they all build to a solution. Roth rejects that, but we have to look at how Catholics, for instance, can say it is all God's will and plan, but free will is real nevertheless. It's difficult to understand how that goes, and no one claims they've solved it. No one. It's just something that we have to say, this is the best we can do. Free will is a major part of our defense of God. God gave us freedom, so the world can't be perfect. We cause a lot of the evil. God allows it for good reasons that we'll look at. Freedom is a pinnacle of our solution. So you're getting from atheistic writings now this argument that there really is no free will. You think you're free. But if there is no God, you can't really make an argument for freedom, because if you're saying there's just the universe of cause and effect, run by natural laws of physics and chemistry and biology, if that's all there is, if we knew enough, we could predict everything. Instead of saying that there's freedom, because it's very hard, by the way, to make an argument for free will, except to appeal to God. It's almost impossible to prove free will, but we assume it if you believe in God. But it's easy to argue against free will if you don't believe in God. If you don't believe in God as the source of freedom, you just look around a universe without a God in it, and what you have is everything, including human beings, including the human brain, which gives rise to a mind. But everything is physical, and everything that's physical, that's all the universe is without God. It's just a big physical, naturalistic place. There's no spirit. There's not even a mind in a strange sort of way, because the brain is physical, but the mind is some kind of pseudo-reality, some false reality that we take as separate from the brain, but it really isn't. So from an atheist perspective, they are trying very hard to deny that free will. Some of them don't want to deny this, because then their own atheism collapses. It's saying atheism is such a great worldview, and they don't want to say, oh, by the way, we don't believe in free will, because then you'd say, well, that doesn't sound like a great worldview to me then. But when they use it against theists, they use the argument that Susan Blackmore comes to mind, and a whole bunch of other philosophers of mind that write book after book after book. Those of you who are not in the other class, you can find this thing. It's on naturalism.org. Naturalism.org. And there's a little section on there about what they believe. There's no God, there's no soul, there's no afterlife. Everything is just meaningless in the long run, and by the way, there's no free will. And then they have all of these book reviews of books that have just come out from philosophers of mind and psychologists showing you that there's no free will. Theists believe in free will. We think that's a major aspect of our defense of God. I don't know what atheists think they're gaining by denying free will, but I can tell you it's consistent. If you're an atheist, you really can't make a good argument for free will, so at least they're being consistent. But think of that horrible thought. You probably have seen its ugly head already, but it's not funny when you start thinking of the implications. When you see naturalism.org thinking, the only real issue now is, should we ever praise or blame anybody? Should we empty the prisons? Because no one is responsible for what they do. If we knew enough about you or me, we could predict everything that we're ever going to think and do, because everything you've done just now has come from causes that have just happened, a cause and effect chain. So if we knew enough about the universe and about us, which is impossible, of course, there's an infinity of causes going on, but if we knew enough, in theory, we could show that everybody is simply obeying causal laws of physics and chemistry and biology, and we really aren't free. No thoughts are free, no decisions. I think we're on good grounds. I can't go on with that because that's the atheism class. I think we have a better argument for free will than skeptics do, saying there is no free will. And I think we have a more livable worldview too, because if you really get into the atheistic line that there is no freedom, it's all meaningless, it's all determined, that's a very bleak existence, to say the least. Yes, it's not your fault when you do bad, and it's not your fault when you do good, but my Lord, it justifies everything as simply cause and effect. Naturalism.org must have about 40 books there they're reviewing on this, showing you that people are teaching this. These are big names, scholars, and by the way, they worry about telling you that. They don't want to tell you there's no freedom because you might get upset. This to me is like some fantasy land. This suffering of God theory, this is an attempt, I was telling you, this started with people like, probably started with Alfred North Whitehead, the founder of process philosophy. He objected to the traditional understanding of God as, quote, a metaphysical iceberg. That somehow God was not affected by our suffering. It was almost like a deistic God that was in Christianity and some of Islam and some of Judaism, just in general terms. Like that God wasn't affected. There is a theory that God can't suffer. God's beyond all of that. This doctrine, though, that Jews and Christians have picked up in the 1920s, it's trying to say, Elie Wiesel picks this up, it's trying to say that God is involved in the suffering, and it's trying to defend God's goodness, despite evidence to the contrary, that God is not doing anything about our suffering. Elie Wiesel, who goes on and on and on about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob going to God's throne and complaining about all the suffering, and he keeps saying in this poem, he keeps saying that God is silent. There's no answer. And right at the end of this horrible hour of listening to this, all of these testimonies of pain and misery, it says that God sheds a tear, and that Abraham and Isaac don't see it, and they leave heaven angry that God hasn't answered their plea, just like Job did, although Job got an answer. They leave heaven, and they don't see, says Wiesel, that God goes with them. This is a way of saying God's powerful and God's good, but God's silent. You know, there's the silence of God. Why is God so silent amid tragedy? That's where we are now, like with the gratuitous problem of evil, the evidential problem of evil. Why doesn't God eradicate these meaningless, horrendous evils? Why is God so silent? That's the big question. There are actually quite a few answers to it, quite a few things you can say about why God's so silent. Roth rejects that. Now, he rejects that in a way that should offend just about every Christian that reads it. He basically says, hey, we suffered, and the Messiah was supposed to come, and Christians believed that Jesus was the Messiah, and we're still suffering. So what difference did he make? Now for a Christian, and you wonder how Roth can call himself a Christian theologian, because the basis of Christianity is that Jesus did make a difference. That's what Christians believe. Jesus ends the suffering, but it's not here and now. We've been reconciled. This is Romans 5 where this comes from. We were at war with God, but now we're reconciled. He did make a difference. It's a long story. Roth is saying, though, the suffering of God stuff, well, Jesus suffered. Christians believe he was God, and yet what difference did it make? Well, for Christians, it makes all the difference in the world. Number 7, so Roth is saying the proper attitude is protest, right? Protest against God. God's not intervening. Roth is saying we should pray with protest like Job did. And that should be part. We shouldn't just praise God and thank God, but protest. Now, I'm not sure that's a good idea, but I guess, when you look at the Psalms, that's what they do. They do protest. Open-mindedly, with an open heart, without hedging. They simply tell God that they're suffering and they wish He would do something. So they are protesting in a way, but his attitude is, if you protest to God, God might change and God might do more. These two go together. He questions God's goodness for not doing more against suffering. So he's saying, if God won't do it, we have to do it. And the way we should do it is to help clean up the suffering ourselves, but also to protest to God and maybe we can move God. Maybe we can move God to do more. There's so much blasphemy in this from a theological point of view, it just makes me dizzy. God doesn't need your protest to change, is the simple answer. Like, that's just insane. God's already beyond all of this nonsense. He understands what's going on. He's powerful, he's loving. But Roth is saying, God hasn't intervened. Let's just protest and we can make God better. It's nonsense.
Please join us for more episodes of Dr. Whitney's God and Evil series and other series that will be available on this channel. Dr. Whitney is an acknowledged international authority on the problem of evil, for which he has published dozens of important works. These include his book, Theodicy, The Problem of God and Evil, the only definitive annotated bibliography on the problem of evil, as well as his popular book, What Are They Saying About God and Evil, and dozens of other books, book chapters, journal articles, and book reviews. He has also published articles in the New Catholic Encyclopedia and in the forthcoming New Westminster Dictionary of Christian Theology. For more information and resources, please visit Dr. Whitney's website at drbarrywhitney.com and his Facebook page, Thinking About God with Dr. Barry Whitney. The God and Evil series was recorded in Dr. Whitney's university course on God and Evil. The lectures have been edited for a wider audience and enhanced by music composed by Dr. Whitney specifically for this series. This God and Evil series is the property of Dr. Whitney, 2016.